Regenerative Ed is produced by Grounded Teaching. And if this podcast means something to you, we're just so happy about that. You could share it with your friends or colleagues or family and, rate it, review it, do all the things you're supposed to do, subscribe when you like a podcast. It actually really does make a difference. And if you're someone who's been supporting us on the Regenerative Ed Patreon with your funds, wow, we are so appreciative of that. And it's really helped keep us going. And another thing that's really helped keep us going is the messages that we receive, the emails, the folks on the Mighty Network who really want to be a part of thinking about how we educate differently. And if you want to join the Mighty Network, that's our free community. You can either get there through our website link or I'll link it in the show notes as well. We are so excited about the future possibilities for regenerative education. And I'm excited to be back after a little winter season break from the podcast. We needed to take some time for our own learning. I personally went through sort of a really intense training program for permaculture design because I wanted to improve my own design skills as it relates to regenerating mainly physical landscape space and also social spaces and community spaces. And I learned so much. And in addition to that, Jess and I also did a lot of recorded talking, some virtual talking, just not on the podcast. We did spend the last few months speaking at some universities about things related to slow fashion and regeneration. We were involved in some university working groups. And one thing that I was so happy was that I was invited by a listener and supporter. Huge shout out to Susan, if you're listening, to co-keynote speak with her at the Wharton Business School conference about reimagining education, about regenerative ed. And, I just felt so grateful to be able to talk to a group of folks who are mainly designing ed tech solutions and some other things about what those actual solutions could be rooted in. Because, we can try to design our way out of problems with tech at the center sometimes, or other things at the center. But what if we put life at the center and natural systems at the center? And so that was just a great opportunity. What else? Oh, we got a cool talk coming up for the Sierra Club on January 24th, which I think if you're a member of the Sierra Club, you can register anytime now. And just a side note that if you want us to share, something specific about operating your school or department or org from regenerative mindset, we're always happy to share. Just reach out on the website. Oh, and actually another fun little side note before we get into it today, just as I mentioned, we've had quite a bit of exposure on podcasts and stuff, but I actually had my first live local news spot last week. And the night before on Monday night, I was actually feeling a little bit like, live local news, that's where all of your parents' friends from high school see you. And then you get, Facebook messages from them or whatnot. And I don't know, I was feeling a little bit nervous for having such a general audience. And I was telling Mike, my husband, this, and he said, well, at least you don't have a zit or anything on your face. I'm like, yeah, that's true. Right. But then about 3 to 5 minutes later, I was playing with Owen, who's our 5-year-old, and he was crouched down on the ground in one of those about to spring up positions, so like hands and feet on the ground, about to spring up. But I didn't know that he was about to spring up. So I was hovering over him, and exactly as I went down to tickle him, right, he sprang up and his head uppercut my jaw, which slammed my shit in such a weird angle and with such brute force that I immediately knew that I had broken teeth. It was like, hey, broken teeth. Like I didn't even want to touch my teeth with my tongue because I was so afraid. And sure enough, I did. So I did my first local live TV news spot with broken teeth, which was, looking back, it's kind of comical. And I was able to get it mostly fixed, and we're just praying that it's not fractured at the root. But worse things have happened, right? Worse things have happened. So anyways, there's a few reasons why I'm sharing that little story. One, it's pretty humbling. I think it can be helpful to hear humbling things, right? That like you can do a live local news spot with some broken teeth. Which it wasn't really that noticeable because of the distance that they were away from me and whatnot. But 2, if you have kids, their heads actually can knock your teeth out. So be aware of that. And then, 3, if you hear my S's are a little weirder, you are right. even the slightest change in teeth I've found can result in having to relearn the patterns of where your tongue goes when you talk. And it's been a weird thing for me. I feel like I'm sort of relearning a little bit of, especially the S's. So that brings us to today's podcast, which is the first episode in our series on mapping patterns into our learning. Just like I'm having to remap sort of where my tongue goes in my mouth to figure out how to talk. There are other patterns that exist out there. And what we want to do is think about, when we're looking at patterns, what to pay attention to, why we should pay attention, and how we can incorporate all of this into education in concrete, specific ways. And so today we're talking a little bit more generally about patterns as an overview. And then over the next 8 episodes, we'll be digging into different types of natural patterns. So this is the first deep dive series that we're doing here on the podcast. And it's something that I've been thinking about for a while. We've been doing workshops and whatnot, but honestly, I think from what we've seen, when we first started doing workshops a couple of years ago, there was a lot of attendance, a lot of Zoom. People were like, I'm not sick of Zoom yet. And I think it's just exhausting after a day of work now. And so we're going to experiment with putting some stuff we might normally put into a workshop into podcast series and just see how that goes. So once it kicks off, we are going to have some supplemental materials available on our site, just like if we were running a workshop. And, you can follow along on the Regenerative Ed Mind Network, free community to interact with the content a bit more too, if you want to, give your own thoughts or, connect with other people about it. So we're going to see how this one goes. Please let us know with any of your feedback. And one more thing, over the last 2 years of doing this podcast, it's come to my attention that we actually have a pretty wide listener base, not just K-12 teachers, but really all sorts of support staff, college, university instructors, homeschool moms, people who actually are really connected to education, but are interested in regenerative systems, of which education is one, obviously, or potentially one. And it's actually a pretty wild collection of folks. And from what I've been told, and I agree, a lot of you have shared that what we talk about here isn't just applicable to the classroom, but to being a human. And every time I hear that from somebody, my heart just bursts wide open. It just is so lovely to hear. So anyways, I just wanted to share that. And I'm, really excited because we need everybody as we think about changing systems for a regenerative future. I think we originally started this with K-12 in mind, but truly if we want to build a more regenerative future, everybody bringing their unique context is such a powerful thing. So again, thank you from the bottom of our hearts for listening and for participating with us. And let's get into the pod. Hey everyone, happy New Year. For most people, any time of New Year's, whether it's the calendar New Year, the Jewish New Year, the first day of spring, first day of school, all of those feelings of a new year brings up my desire, at least, to break old destructive patterns. And then there's also this big hope of creating new life-generating patterns that I always think about. And, I used to only think of my New Year's as the start of the school year. And it would get really confusing whenever anybody would say next year and they actually meant March. I just, my husband would do that all the time. I'm like, you mean this year, this school year, right? But recently, maybe that's you too. But anyways, recently I've come to appreciate all sorts of New Year's, the beginning of the school year as a new year, spring equinox as a new year, my birthday as a new year, January 1st as the start for a fresh, new life-giving entry into some new patterns for life and for work. And really the question is how does that play into what we're kicking off here with our series on patterns? Well, in this podcast, we are always trying to see how we can shift from an industrial education system to one that's modeled after a natural system. And to do that, we look to natural systems that exist in our world. And it could be our microbiome, it could be the way that tree roots grow. There's so much there. And one of the key things that we're looking at when we observe those natural systems is patterns. That's one of the key things that we're observing for. So first of all, what is a pattern? Well, in natural systems, it doesn't actually have to look exactly like identical elements one after the next, like when you're asking a first grader to identify patterns on a worksheet, right? Philip Ball, who wrote the book on patterns in nature, which we're actually going to be referring to throughout this series, notes that a pattern in nature is really more like when it doesn't look random. And he gives the example of zebra stripes. So we know that there's a pattern there, but the stripes aren't identical. They're not exactly the exact same width or shape. We see a pattern, but it's not one identical element after the next. That's what we're going to be referring to as a pattern throughout this series. Now, why is it so important to practice finding patterns? Well, if this was a class right now, I would pause, give you all a chance to weigh in, because a huge group of you would come up with a stellar list. And I'm sure things that I haven't even thought of why patterns are important. If you want to make this exercise a little bit more cognitive, feel free to pause the podcast here and jot down why it could be so important to practice the skill of observing and understanding patterns. So my favorite one that might not come to top of mind is that recognizing patterns in natural systems will simply help us connect with them more. This is really invaluable in a world where we are so disconnected from so much. It's taking just a little bit of time to notice and be present and, really even appreciate, right? Practice that gratitude. So you can consider observing patterns as a daily practice of presence, and you can even check it off as your meditation for the day, right? Because the truth is that we won't see the patterns if we are so in our head, which is one thing that when we are thinking about regeneration, we're thinking about being more alive, more awake, more here. And that is what will create more life, not being in our past so much or in our future. I remember one time Jess and I were giving a natural dye workshop, which is where you dye, you can dye paper or textiles or whatever with plants. And we were doing a walk in one of our local parks to identify the different plants for folks who maybe aren't used to seeing dye plants or don't notice them. One of our friends pulled up actually, and she was participating in the walk with us, and she pulled in and she's like, "What are we looking at? Everything here is, green." And we were like, "Yeah, but when you start to look closer, you can really see." And when she left, she was like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I thought that everything was just like grass, basically," because you're not looking. It's like that with everything, right? When something is personally affecting you or your eyes are opened, you start to see those things more around you, right? If you've ever been pregnant, everybody looks like they're pregnant. If you have a blue Honda, everybody has a blue Honda, so you start to see these things. So what we're trying to do here is become more sensitized to recognizing these patterns, and really recognizing will help us be more present, more appreciative. And even if that was the only benefit, right, that we are able to recognize and observe and be present and observe these patterns in nature, right? If that was the only purpose, I would say that those benefits alone are huge, and that we should all be doing it to get better at connecting with natural systems. Okay, reason one, just to recap, if we spend more time just really simply observing those patterns, we're going to be better off. And, you'll be happy to listen to this series just to bring those patterns to the forefront of your mind. Okay, but then it gets even more exciting, because after we observe, we can take the next step of then mimicking those patterns, right? Something called biomimicry. I'll talk about that a lot, which is to design systems in our life that are mimicked after those patterns. So first we observe, we get all the benefits of observation and presence, and then we apply. So why is that important? Well, first off, there is a reason that natural systems use these patterns. Often those patterns create resiliency, efficiency, protection, all usually in service of life, which is really what we're actually trying to do when we create systems ultimately, isn't it? If I try to create a system for all of the students in my classroom, I would like it to either be more efficient or offer more resiliency or create more life in some way, right? Okay, then the other thing that observing and mimicking these patterns does is it allows us to see ourselves as creators of our own lives instead of simply consumers, so that we will be better able to sort of wake up and make decisions to create a more vibrant, regenerative future. And if you're new to the podcast, when I say regenerative, what I mostly mean is that something that creates more life. Sustainable is sustaining what is, since we don't want to sustain what is, currently, because we're not in great shape as a society or a planet. Since we want it to be better, have more vibrancy, have more joy, we use that term regenerative. So, if we are acknowledging that it's important to be designer in our own life when it comes to the things that we have agency to design, we're actually going to be more empowered to do so, because we'll better understand that using natural patterns because we'll better understand what those natural patterns are when we're designing. And I'm going to go over 8 of them. So that's going to help you get sensitized to those patterns that exist out there and then how you can apply them. And you'll feel more empowered to take more agency over being a designer in your own life based on living systems. Okay, so like I said, over the next 8 episodes, we are going to be getting into 8 specific types of patterns. And what I want you to do between this episode and the next episode is to simply be present to patterns, to use your senses. Obviously, the patterns that we see, right, using your eyes, you can look out your window, you can look at your hands, patterns that we hear, right, think about birds, patterns that we feel, breath, beats, music, right? We've talked about music a lot in previous podcasts. But then in addition to your senses, consider some non-tangible patterns that exist in social systems. Okay, so you can start a little list of this on your phone if you want or whatever. What are these patterns that exist in natural systems? What are those rhythms? Where are they in social systems? What do you see? What are you noticing? Create a little list for yourself. You can do it in your head or whatnot, but this is an exercise before we dig into our first pattern on the next episode, which is going to be spirals. So you've got your homework. All right. If you want to connect with us on the community page, click the link in the show notes. And just want to say thanks so much, everyone. I'm going to see you on the next episode where we'll talk about those spirals, what they are, why they are, how you can concretely design systems in your life and your classroom based on what we learn about those spirals. And thank you so much for tuning in. If what you heard today did something for you, thank you for sharing it, truly. Stay tuned for next week. And again, connect on our free community and have a great day, everyone.